Hello and welcome everyone. This is Skip Newberry, President and CEO of TAO. We'll be getting underway in just a minute. Welcome. We're excited to continue the future of work conversation with us in this session, Telecommunication and Workplace Trends, as a part of Techlandia Summit. It's a week-long conference focused on delivering better community outcomes through improved infrastructure, focusing on things like quality of life, efficient service delivery, sustainable and equitable growth, and long-term resilience. So I'm Skip Newberry, President and CEO of TAO, and I'll be your facilitator of this session, along with Ruthie Ditzler, who's our Marketing and Regional Program Coordinator, and she'll be providing some back-end support. So a couple of rules of engagement as we get started here. Wanted to mention that all participants have been muted, so please remain on mute unless a TAO staff member unmutes you and calls on you to talk. You may ask or respond to questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to me or to TAO admin. We'll monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion, and we'll ask you all to engage via the participant icon on your screen. We also encourage you to engage with us on social media during the session. We're excited to share what's happening throughout Techlandia Summit and to get participant takeaways from our events. This session is also being recorded and will be found on TAO's YouTube within 24 hours of the event. A huge thank you to all of the investors and supporters in the Techlandia Summit. We appreciate your sponsorship and are excited to explore topics such as those that I mentioned just a minute ago on mobility, economic resiliency, future of work, and human factors. We have some great support from Comcast Business, which is supporting our future of work portion of the Techlandia Summit, and then overall sponsors AT&T, PGE, PSU, Google, Autodesk, and the Oregon League of Cities. Finally, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for this session. We have architect and smart city planner, Jiri Skopek, and David Tashjian, Regional Vice President, Oregon and Southwest Washington with Comcast. So welcome, Jiri and David. We'd like to first start off by having Jiri kick us off with his presentation, and then we'll move to David next. Jiri, take it away.
Okay. I guess I'll have to share the screen. Here we go. Can you see the screen? Hello, can you see?
Yeah, we can. Thanks.
Excellent, great. So thank you very much. Great to be here. When we talk about the future of work, we probably keep thinking of offices because about 60% of people in North America actually work in offices. Of course, there are other work environments, factories, for example, which are actually increasingly being staffed by robots. And similar kind of things like which happen in agriculture, lots of this work is now disappearing. Fortunately, there are other work opportunities such as social services, care for the elderly, and the coming green economy. For example, home retrofits, installation of renewables, urban farming, greening of the cities, which would make the cities much more pleasant and healthier. However, our focus today is on the offices. So we don't really know what's going to happen in the post office era. There are two possibilities. One which would be the back to the normal, or back to the previous situation where there was a focus on smart and healthy and productive workplace, or with more people now enjoying work from home, many of them might want to continue that way and they might want to stay at home and work from home, or there might be also a new form of the office use, which is the flex space, or sometimes we call it core sharing, or space as a service. So essentially, we have a three potential scenario. The continuation of the use of the central office, remote working from home, and work from some kind of a flexible location. So when we sort of think about the health in productive office, we know that if we have a good air to breathe, good indoor, good indoor air quality, if we have a plenty of lights, we're feeling comfortable temperature, and we are not disturbed by our neighbors, we probably will be more productive. And we certainly have the technology to do that. You know, we have a technology to maintain good indoor air quality, thermal condition, light condition, acoustics, and so on. So we can really enhance that kind of a human experience in the office environment. The other aspect is having a greater convenience and time saving. I'm sure many of you were in a situation where you were stuck in a traffic jam and you arrive late, and your cell phone is discharged, and you don't know quite where to go, and you might even have forgotten who you're actually meeting. So that can be very distracting and probably not very productive. So the technology now allows us wayfinding, space management, booking of office space, and even mobility options that we actually don't have to drive using the car, but you know, maybe there might be some other convenient rail or bus, or even a bicycle, actually. So that's all possible, and it also enhances that human experience. So we have lots of technical attributes which contribute to organizational productivity in the office. Connectivity, we definitely need good connectivity, and I'm sure the next speaker will address that. We need to have continuous energy and power. I spoke about the environmental controls. We need to have an access to information and data. Space planning is very important. You know, having a place where we can gather with other people, collaborative spaces are very important. Resilience. The weather is getting more and more unpredictable, and you know, we hear about the fires all the time, flooding, hurricanes. So we need to be sure that our workplace is actually safe. And in terms of security, cybersecurity is becoming greater and greater problem, or a greater issue. So lots of these attributes are now being developed by various apps and groups working in prop tech. And there are many startups in this field, and it's a kind of quite a big buzz. What is also happening is the increasing use of AI in office workplace, whether it's in the building operations or whether it's a mobile working environment. We know that smart offices now have analytics and predictive maintenance, diagnostic, but some of the latest technologies, for example, like the Google management of the data center, actually manages the energy in those data center automatically. So there is actually no human involved. It's all done by AI, and it's getting some tremendous results, like you know, those data centers now showing like a 40% of energy savings. So that's very good. Monitoring of critical physical aspect is also important. I mentioned resiliency, and when you expect bad weather, you want to make sure that your generators or your UPS or your storage, energy storage systems are um, up to the date, and they can be turned on a dime and used at the moment noticed. So the new AI systems can actually monitor these assets in real time. Maintenance, inspection, that's another aspect. For example, places where are hard to get to, it's like a storage tanks or window cleaning. You now have robots which can do those that kind of work. And I'm sure you've seen some of these videos of Amazon warehouse robots or Walmart retail robots. And robots are very much part of the AI. Some of the latest things, which is just kind of coming, is the potential of even the system learning from observing people's action and possibly having a feedback to the building operations. We now have a face recognition, but in the future, the AI will be actually able to see whether you're sweating, whether you losing attention, you're looking tired, and that can be, or I'm sure it will be monitored, and that information then can be relayed to the building system, which can pump in more air or reduce the temperature and so on. We also have AI in mobile working environment. There are now software which can actually take you, as you're coming to the car park, they get you to the right place, they announce you at the reception, and you might even be meted by a greeter robot, which then take you to a meeting place which is already booked for you and so on. So there are some tremendous things happening in that space. We all benefit from personal productivity AIs. You have chat boxes on every website now, report writing softwares, Google Translate, audio transcription, Grammarly. Those are all the productivity software which kind of helps us to be more productive in our daily tasks. And there are mobility solutions. We don't need to necessarily rely on cars. There might be other ways we can get from A to B. So there is more and more use of this AI in that workplace. Now, what do we experience, many of us experience in the COVID era, is work from home. And for some of them, this is a tremendous experience. It's enjoyable. People are actually more productive, or there certainly have not been any notices of lack of productivity. But for some people, this might not be such a good experience when they have too much distraction, or some people just can't do it. If you first responder, or if you work in retail or hospitals, or you care for elderly, you probably can't work from home. Some of the information we now getting is that about 1/3 of the people who now work from home are not interested in going back to the office. So we probably will see, that number of people working from home will be quite high, and they certainly will probably benefit from some of this AI assisted functionality. The other thing which is happening in the real estate is the use of space. We now have these occupancy sensors which can tell us how well the space is being used. And behold, what are we finding? That the space is not being used very efficiently. This is a picture of a MIT campus, and what you can see, the building is in red. They are government and research agency, and they only have something like a 30 to 40% of occupancy. The MIT campus buildings in yellow, they had 20 to 30% of occupancy, and some of the commercial offices about 50% of the occupancy. So, the space is not fully used. what we finding is that organization today spend about 9 to 10% of their total cost on space. And I'm sure that after the COVID, many organizations will be tightening their belts. So they be probably looking at the use of real estate, quite carefully. So as a result, I believe there probably will be much greater use of the flex space or the space as a service. What some of these new softwares can do is also identify where the majority of the workers live. So you can actually plot where those workers live in relationship to available flex space. So we can optimize the relationship between where people live and where they can work, and probably those companies would be wise to rent or lease a flex space which would be closest to the places where the occupants live, where the workers live. So and that would have a tremendous impact on mobility. That would reduce the traffic in the cities and make it possible for people to walk or bicycle to work. The other effect is that in the social distancing, that the software can also monitor the density of the people in the office, and they can ensure that only certain densities are being maintained. So I can see certainly the influence of the AI in the management of the space being very important. So the AI can handle all the mundane and repetitive tasks across many organizations. In fact, in HR, you can use AI in onboarding and training, schedule the meeting, translate the languages, provide customer support, analyze the data, and so on. So with the greater and greater use of AI and its integration in the workplace, we will probably see people and computers connected so that collectively they can act more intelligently. And I don't mean just kind of using the information, but actually working as a group. And I believe this will lead to greater collective intelligence. So I see the future very positive, and I think we have lots of things to look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiri. And next up we have David from Comcast, and then we'll shift to some moderated Q&A after that.
Hello, Skip and everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here with you. Assume that I would hear otherwise if folks couldn't hear me. So again, thank you very much. First of all, I really enjoyed your presentation. We are absolutely, as a company, from not work from home, thinking about everything that you just outlined, Jiri. How do we bring the workforce together? What is the right way to look at spacing in buildings? And I think our biggest question is, we have a very strong internal employee culture. How do we maintain that? We have a saying of working together to win together. How do you maintain that close environment, having your colleagues back when some percentage of employees are virtual, and how you do that? So Skip, were you going to move forward with some questions?
I am. Sorry about that. I was on mute.
No, that's okay. I just want to make sure I can fill 45 minutes. I just wanted to make sure I was doing things the right way.
No, I've had like the worst problem with Zoom this afternoon. Ruthie on my team can attest. At the beginning, the reason why I wasn't showing up on video was the app kept crashing, so I had to restart my whole computer. Thankfully, I'm also on the phone. So yeah, in terms of questions to kick it off, I was wondering, Comcast has a really interesting perspective in all of this, is one of the largest tech providers, and the shutdown as it relates to COVID-19 must have had impacts on your network as well. So I'm wondering, how did some of the stay-at-home orders really impact Comcast's ability to meet the needs of its customers, and how is it possible that we didn't completely bring down the entire internet?
Yeah, I think I'll answer the last question kind of first, and how the network handled it. We plan for these things, not necessarily an entire world to be shut down, but we have a lot of redundancy. We build our network for the peak times. We don't build it for the norm. And then literally overnight, we were in the peak times. So we already had a very stable network. I'm very proud of our network, but things did change dramatically. Over 30% increase in upstream overnight, nearly 40% increase in our Wi-Fi data, dramatically changing video conferencing. I think it's 200 or 300% that we saw increases. So really, I think it's the basis of our network, as well as our just continued investment with our network. We've doubled our speeds approximately every 18 to 24 months, increased our capacity to go along with that. We also had the resources to quickly spring into action. And without getting too technical, although I'm sure many of you are much more technical than I am, we feed, fiber goes into a node, and then a node feeds out into a couple of hundred customers. And as that traffic increased dramatically, it created the need for us to split more of those nodes more rapidly. So we actually did it over the course of the month of April and May, settling down a little bit here in June. Just in Oregon and Southwest Washington, we saw about a 5x increase in that normal volume of splitting out to be able to handle that capacity.
So I'm also wondering, if with about, 1,500 or so employees in Oregon and Southwest Washington, how did the shutdown really impact your own internal operations? I mean, we've heard from a ton of members about how they've had to pivot on a dime. I imagine as an infrastructure provider, you probably planned for at least some of these types of scenarios as compared to some of our members.
Yeah, again, some, but nothing like this. So normally if we had a weather condition, we're completely connected and routed to multiple other sites throughout the country from an employee perspective. Primary impact is around our call center agents handling service, certainly billing and other things as well, but really we were needed to be there for service. We sent home, as we like to say in the company, about here in our West Division, so the Western US, about 8,000 employees in about 72 hours. Across the company, that number is closer to 25,000 employees. And it was interesting what we went through being here a bit on the tip of the spear in the Northwest, where Seattle kind of first, Portland was right there. But over the course of about a week or so, California was first to enact some of the ordinances. And so while we were operating a little bit in what I'll call a little bit of some of the microcosms, California, Portland, Seattle, the company quickly leapt into let's get everyone home that can be home. And then let's also, we've had virtually the same kind of technical protocols. You call, you schedule an appointment, you have an issue, a concern, a technician comes out and solves it for you. We've had pretty much the same operating rhythm for nearly 50 years. We had to change that in about 72 hours as well. So I think it speaks to that working together to win together attitude for such a large company. We also operate in many instances very quickly and very agile. And we have the vast majority of our employees, well, all of our employees that can be home are home. And all of our employees that are in the public in some form or fashion, either maintaining our network or working on customer challenges and issues, we have very clear protocols for all of those employees as well.
One thing that I'm thinking about is that, all of us have essentially become our own IT experts, or amateur experts, I should say amateurs, working from home. And I'm wondering, how as a company, how have you addressed some of these issues with, entire workforces now, remote? What are some of the things you've offered?
Yeah, so first thing was really keeping America connected was our first big thing, and not sure we can always help with other technologies such as Zoom. I've had my fair share of them as well, but really making sure that folks were connected. So we've maintained a network connection into 100% of our customers' homes that wanted to keep it regardless of their ability to pay. That has been also maintained an environment where customers can get connected. We actually saw an incredible demand April and May, and really some of that even continuing into June across our entire footprint, as it is a bit of a recognition that our network is special and that we are open for business. So I think that making sure that folks are connected is step one. Step two, really some of our products that really help with that. We've got security products both on the residential and commercial side of the business, controlling your Wi-Fi network, ensuring that malware and the bad guys aren't able to get into your systems. That's probably the other way. Boy, the on-site IT, not sure that's quite an area that we've got cracked. Let me know if you figure that out, Skip.
Will do. Another topic that's top of mind for a lot of our technologists, including VPs of engineering, CTOs, et cetera, has been security. So with the shift to all virtual, I'm wondering what are some of the things you're seeing in that arena?
Yeah, so I touched on it a little bit. We have a product called Security Edge for business and really XFi Advantage on the residential side. They're very similar products. They block malware. They allow you to control users, allow you to use filtering to ensure that that your folks that are working from home are doing things that we want them to be doing, and really being able to customize those solutions. We've introduced a new work product exactly as you're describing, allowing companies of all size, from 10 employees to tens of thousands of employees, that want to provide that connection for their employees, and then the security that goes along with that. So we have what I'll call, on the business side, fairly customized features to ensure, and then on the residential side, by having our XFi product and controlling what devices are on your network and what they can and can't do, and really working closely with our security professionals to stay on top of all the things the bad souls are trying to do today.
I'm also wondering, like, in terms of video or data upload and consumption rates, what are some of the trends you're seeing there?
One of the interesting ones is how peak times have changed, where historically we had our kind of downstream between 9 and 7 p.m. That's moved from 9 p.m. to 7 p.m. So with no traffic, folks are doing their peak activities earlier in the day. You don't have a commute. Kind of a solid 8 to 5, or in many instances for some of us, depending on what coast you're on and what your role is, sometimes 6 to 8 over a 12 and 14-hour days. But that viewing is happening sooner. The consumption is up anywhere between 20 to 40%. And across all platforms, mobility is bigger than ever, as multiple things are being used across the home. So our to-go products, our Stream app, as well as accessing all of the third-party apps that we aggregate through X1, is up considerably. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, YouTube, et cetera. We're seeing significant 30-40% increases in that space as well.
And I'm wondering too, like, if you look a little bit to the future, what are some trends that we're likely to see as it relates to work from home, both for businesses, but also on the sort of residential side of it?
Yeah, so I'll hit on businesses first. I mentioned Security Edge, also new products that we've introduced, Active Core. It's intelligent centralized control for all your business networks, bringing in multiple site locations. Business voice mobility, allowing you to work virtually anywhere. Smart Office, which provides cameras and monitoring for physical locations. And then again, any customized managed solutions that we work with as well. So on the Comcast business side, really, if you are a 10-person business or a 10,000-person business, we have a solution for you. That wasn't always the case, as we're really only in about our 10th year seriously in the business space. And we have made tremendous advances in the last couple of years. On the Xfinity or the residential side of things, a couple of things that are hitting from a smart communities perspective, and that's around managed Wi-Fi, primarily in multiple dwelling properties or apartment buildings that can allow authentication throughout the building. I'm sure many of us have experienced a less than great public area Wi-Fi, depending on what that building is. We have managed solutions there as well. One of the things that we're most proud about is a partnership and an acquisition we made a couple of years ago with a company called Machine Q, really building a smart community with IoT elements. I think the application here that struck me the most is you think about an apartment building, again, as an example, as tenants move in and out, you may or may not have on-site leadership, on-site management. And if you had the thermostat, say, connected through an IoT device, you would be able to know when someone has moved in and out, turn off their air conditioning and their heating, can save tremendous amount of money for that property. And then also, as you think about a little bit of the future, really Wi-Fi ready. If you move into a new building, the ability to be able to connect instantly, having that building pre-wired for Wi-Fi, that unit pre-wired for Wi-Fi is also very, very key. And I think it's also important. Yeah, and so maybe just one last thing. It's nothing new. We've been kind of, on this journey to have more advanced products and services for both consumers and businesses. And we are accelerating what that looks like in the future.
Excellent. So there's a question we got from the one of the audience members asking specifically about the need for kind of dedicated connection equipment at home. Work-only laptop, work-only web connection, separate from, say, personal applications and personal devices, and sort of the importance of security and all that, as well as privacy. And so I'm wondering, are there particular issues you've seen or different approaches that you've taken as a company around some of the questions along those lines you may be getting from employees at companies that you serve, where it's like, okay, I'm at home now, I'm doing a lot of work stuff, and it's mixed with a lot of my personal as well. And
yeah, I think that as we think about how businesses want to operate long term, and I think it goes back to Jira's presentation, let's say I'm a business owner and I have 100 people in a facility, and I make a decision to go down the path of saving on some real estate, saving on some facilities costs, and I'm gonna have 50% of my employees work virtually from home. Well, my needs for bandwidth and my needs for connectivity in that building and the size of that building changes dramatically. The way we think it will play out is then employers are going to want to provide that secure connection for folks. We know that VPN usage is up 30–40%, but having that done on kind of my dime as the business owner, and knowing that I can control that is the direction we think we'll be moving. As far as from a consumer, which is probably very prevalent as well, where the employer says, hey, you can expense your Comcast internet or whatever internet you have. Then that is where I think our other security products come in. Our XFi Advantage that prevents that on the residential side already, and then using your own company's Wi-Fi would create that secure environment. So I believe that we have the right things in place. It will be a transition, and it will be a hybrid. One of the ways that we're kind of approaching this is the way we're operating today is not the way we're operating yesterday. It's also not the way that we're going to be operating in the future, and figuring out what is that kind of hybrid mix as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I'm going to shift a little bit here. I want to talk a little bit later with you about some of what you're seeing in the education arena as well, but have a question or two here I want to throw Jiri's way, and specifically around the aspect of sort of health and productivity. And so I'm wondering, like, when it comes to that intersection between health on the one hand and productivity on the other, Jiri, I'm wondering if you could speak to some trends that are likely going forward as we think about some element of this work from home environment continuing.
Well, it's kind of sort of interesting because there has been focus on productivity of knowledge workers. We've seen tremendous increases in productivity in for example, in manual work, like I mentioned in offices, but there have been significant decline in the actual productivity of knowledge workers. And so there are sort of various factors. I guess the bottom line is, you can have all the kind of a condition at home, or all the right environment, but the bottom line is, do you like your boss or not? And um, and that's what's going to make you productive or not. So it's more kind of a sort of the organization of the work than the environment. I mean, the environment obviously plays an important role as well, but it's probably less important than how the actual business is organized. And I think actually, we've seen so many of these startups. In fact, it's kind of interesting because we talks about this, differentiation between these giant companies like Amazon and Google, and then we have so many startups. So I think lots of people actually do want to be their own bosses and do their own work, independent of the environment. But when it comes to the actual environment, at certain size of the organization, the environment starts to matter. I mean, you had all these startups which were started in garages, like, Apple was in a little shack at the back. Jeff Bezos started in tiny little office, and they put up with lots of the inconvenience to get going. But once the organization gets to certain size, the other pack of the jobs, like the health and the environment of the workplace, become that much more important. So I think then you have the focus on the wellness in the space. The right kind of the right indoor air quality, the right lighting, and so on. So I think what I'm trying to say is there are more factors which come to play, and the health and the health and the other kind of a focus come only at certain stage of the size of the business.
Yeah, we've had, just anecdotally, a number of our members in the last few weeks in particular start to pay more attention to sort of employee health and wellness, including looking for different ways they can provide them with resources, like ways to access, say the environment, or things you can do at home or in smaller spaces in terms of improving your health, taking a break from some of the virtual engagement that is now like consuming a lot of people's lives, right? So with stay-at-home orders or social distancing, a lot of people have been relying on applications, conferencing, video conferencing for social as well as work, as well as learning, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I'm wondering, what are some of the things you're seeing in terms of opportunities to, I guess, take advantage going forward of, or leverage, if you will, the opportunity for more productivity where people aren't stuck in a car commuting all day long, but instead are at home, but also where employers need to be mindful of, okay, at some point, work has to turn off and your home life has to be present. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to some of the things you're seeing and trends we can look forward to related to that.
Well, it's the big question of the big brother watching. And I mean, there can be advantages of monitoring. We know, from a personal experience that when you watch how much you eat, how much you walk, how much you run, you can actually improve your productivity. But lots of people don't watch what they actually do during the day. my wife got addicted to social media. So she actually said, hey, it's time to stop. So she actually times herself, and she's got this app which actually after 1 hour social media kind of stops her. So I think that there could be a kind of a growth of monitoring. How do you respond to your home environment? And I don't mean just kind of the environmental monitoring. What is your temperature and humidity and noise and so on? But actually, how do you spend your time? And um, how much you spend time looking out of the window, how much so many people procrastinate, that's sort of like I'm just going to have another cup of tea and I'm just going to sort of clean the dishes before I'm going to get to the work when you work from home. So I think eventually, there's got to be some kind of a medium where you have a sort of level of monitoring for your own sake, but also I'm sure there'll be, the employees will be also interested to see how productive the people are at home.
Yeah, if I could add also kind of from an employer, from a management perspective, we're worried about several things and trying to address them. One, making sure folks aren't overproductive. And yes, that is a thing with some employees. At the same time, making sure they're not underproductive. And that, is it easier or harder to manage what I'll call, the less than ambitious employees, to the point that you were just making, Jiri, around, I'm gonna have another cup of tea before I make my next meeting. The other thing that we're very concerned about is the mental health. And that was touched on as well, of how do you maintain breaks and how do you build that in? How do you work with some of the informal connections that you used to have, the water cooler talk, so to speak, or the going to get a cup of coffee and working out a business problem while you're waiting for the coffee to brew? How do you create some of those environments virtually? And then at the same time, we've joked a little bit and said, boy, if I have one other virtual meeting on how to deal with mental health during virtual environment, I'm like, that's enough is enough. Sometimes you got to make a phone call also. So we are working through kind of each of those pieces as well.
That's a great point, David. David, while we have you here, I wanted to ask your thoughts on sort of virtual learning. I know a number of us, myself included, have been kind of doing the teaching aspect more than we did before COVID-19, and I have amazing respect for teachers. My mom was one, but wow. It's not easy, and especially in a virtual environment where multiple people in some cases are working from the same space as well while kids are virtually learning. And I'm wondering, with access to internet being so important, we've seen a lot of issues around the state and elsewhere around the country where people have been pointing to sort of a digital divide, if you will, where it's lack of access to certain types of hardware or training or network capabilities. And I'm wondering, what are some of the things that Comcast as a company has been doing to kind of bridge that gap?
Well, as I said at the outset, first and foremost, making sure that everyone's connected during this time when so many Americans are out of work. That's kind of number one. Number two is around our Internet Essentials program. Obviously, I think everyone is aware that the digital divide actually exists within the classes more than any geographies. Not that there aren't geographical challenges, but within our lower socioeconomic sections is where the biggest divide is. We have a product called Internet Essentials that we've made free to all customers for 60 days, for the first 60 days. And then the third piece where we're addressing it specifically from a connectivity, I do want to hit on the hardware for just a minute, from a connectivity perspective, is we're working with school systems, whether that's an individual school or whether that's an entire school system or a city or a state even, where the schools are providing what we call sponsored services, where when our 60 days of complimentary service ends, then the school would pick up the additional charge for those students to stay connected. And we have thousands, I'm going to mess up the numbers, so I won't get specific, but we have thousands of those cases across our market and tens of thousands across the entire company. And I would say school systems and school boards are very interested in that as a go forward program. That's not new. That's just really come to light. And then the last piece, which we're not a hardware manufacturer or distributor, but we are having a lot of conversations around what we could do as a company, as a broadband provider to help. Right now we have a discounted computer that we offer, but we're thinking how can we make that even more accessible? That's a $150 laptop. But what could we do to even make that more accessible? My wife works for a school system in Colorado. My family's still in the process of relocating here to Oregon. And that was their biggest challenge, was not even necessarily connectivity, but it was really, did they have the right equipment? And the school that she is in, about 20% of their students never logged on once during the period of time when they sent everyone home. So it's definitely something that has the attention of our company, of our most senior leaders. I'm not making an announcement and we don't have a solution today, but it is something that we recognize as an opportunity, a place that actually our CEO made a personal investment of about 50,000 computers that were donated to school systems back in the Philadelphia area.
That's great. And I know, like, locally with the Internet Essentials program and some of the work that you all have been doing to coordinate a variety of the different providers of hardware and donations for tech companies, Comcast has been really involved in that. I know we've been personally involved at the association level too, and it's definitely, the need is great, and it's great to see that type of support. There was an interesting question that, prompted one that I'd like to ask Jiri, which is, as we think about like this cultural dynamic between different functions within a company and sort of work from home versus not. Obviously, working from home is not necessarily a panacea for everyone, right? So some people are clamoring to get back into the office, others might prefer to stay home. So as companies are starting to figure out, who gets to stay home, who doesn't, who has to stay home, who doesn't, who gets to go back to the office. How have you seen some companies approach that with a mind towards maintaining a certain amount of culture and transparency in terms of how the company makes decisions?
Well, that's an important question. I guess one of the things will company have to sort of consider who's going to stay at home and who's going to work will be how important is their work in terms of like I mentioned, some of these workers which absolutely cannot stay at home. The frontline workers. Some people working in shops, medical staff, and care for the elderly. So they obviously, will be, they won't have the option. I guess other things that the company will have to consider will be the amount of supervision. What has been kind of interesting, if you actually look at some of the statistics, what has been sort of said about the interaction between workers, it's very important that they feel the connection to the company. And one of the problems is in some of the flex spaces was that in spite of the free beer and those kind of a social events where people were getting some free stuff, people typically took that stuff and took the beer and went back to work in their computers. So even some of those encouragement for people to meet collectively and work collectively were not that effective. So what has been promoted would be that if people do work at home, that their supervising officer would actually come and visit them in their home. So, I think that probably will be, something which we will see, that your supervisor might come and see you and have that kind of a connection with you at home.
So one other question I wanted to ask, and then we'll get to one of the moderated ones, or one of the ones from the audience. So there's been some press coverage about impacts potentially to salaries. This is something I've seen over the years with some remote work, where companies will adjust the salary of that function based on the cost of living of the area in which that person is located, whereas they might be, making less as a result of the choice to be remote. And so I'm wondering, are we gonna see similar types of trends coming out of this as more people are shifted to remote?
Again, that'll be an interesting thing, what's going to happen. Some people actually feel that they work from home, they should be paid more. But lots of the companies see this as a perk. And in fact, recently Facebook and Shopify actually announced that people who are working from home, they might see a change in their salary. Part of the rationale for maybe reduction will be that if you stay at home in an area which actually has a lower cost of living, why should the company support you with the kind of a salary which you would expect in some certain metropolitan location where the cost of living is much higher. Also, you're saving money on transportation. So, there is actually quite a bit of saving you might have if you stay at home. So I think some of the companies are taking view why they should pay the same amount of money if you are actually saving money. So I think some people working from home might get a bit of a shock that there could be a discussion about their salary being slightly reduced.
Yeah, and I think in the rarely significant cost of living environments such as the Bay Area, even Seattle, I know that we don't have low cost of living here, but there are pockets in the West that are dramatically different. That's happening today where folks are moving, and you can move 50 miles away from San Francisco and literally cut your living expenses in half, or even by 60, 70, 80% even. I think it's an important question. Also have to make sure that you hold on to that top talent. So, as far as a large employer, we're not contemplating anything significant there today. Doesn't mean that it won't be down the road. I'll tell you, my own personal pocketbook has, spending's been dramatically different for me working from home. Gas is simply one thing, but going into just the accessibility of businesses has been a big change as well. I think it's a part of the dialogue to continue.
So we have about 5 minutes left or so, and what I'd like to do is ask a question of each of you, which is, we have an opportunity to do a little bit of a discussion or breakout after this, and after each of our main discussions with panelists, we have an opportunity to think about what are projects or policies that we might want to try and move forward in the coming months in the region. And on this topic of working kind of remote or work from home, and both the technology infrastructure issues as well as some of the productivity and space related issues, I'm wondering what would you most like to see? Like it could be tied to like a particular gap or issue that you've seen come up, or it could be something that is more sort of opportunistic. Where we can move something forward maybe that hasn't been able to be moved forward in the past. And I wanted to start first with Jiri and see if he has a recommendation, then we'll go to David.
I think I'm actually quite excited about some of the AI situations, where you could use more effectively some of these coming application, and it's more kind of a sort of personal fascination. So I will be certainly exploring, some of these applications some of them which are mentioned, how can I put them to better use?
Yeah, I'm watching the chat here a little bit, and there's a lot of questions around privacy. I want to be really clear about kind of our position on privacy. We will not sell or monitor anyone's information anywhere, inclusive of our employees. We're not doing anything different for an employee that's working from home. We have certain monitoring policies that are in place today. But I do think it's an important question around privacy. Each company is going to approach this really differently. And I think in the end that, good and great employees and those that aren't will be exposed regardless of whether they're virtual or not. I don't need to put a tracking device on what you're doing on your breaks, but I will be able to look at your work product to see. But I think the notion of privacy with work from home is an interesting one to explore. It's a pretty squishy topic, quite frankly, one that we don't have an answer for. And then the second piece, and it plays into a little bit, is how do you maintain the right kind of culture? How do you maintain the right level of connectivity as humans? And I think it was also mentioned in the chat, especially for those people, when I have a conversation with employees and I ask them how they feel about going back to the office, I'm never going back to I can't wait to go back. And so when you think about as humans, and I think you touched on it up front, it's somewhere in the 50% range that say they would rather work from home. And then depending on which group that we've surveyed, it can be as many as 70, 80, 90%. But there is a percentage of really great employees that don't necessarily want to do it. So I think kind of privacy in the home and who works from home and how do you maintain a good work culture is something that would be interesting to tackle.
That's a great point. And on the latter one, I know Jiri and I have talked in the past a little bit about maybe there's an opportunity for companies to think about distributed offices, that are smaller and more flex, but closer to pockets or clusters of employees who would be working from home, so that there's options for those folks to come together collectively, but not in as quite a large a group as they would historically with a single home office. And it's an interesting thought exercise, a lot more complex from a facilities management unless you go for space as a service.
That's exactly what it is. And those are the conversations that we're having. And quite frankly, we're having them pre-COVID. But when you talk about flexibility, then that makes that more difficult depending on the size work group you have. You actually have to move into prescriptive, meaning these folks can come in on this day and these folks can come in on this day. Because you wouldn't create an environment where everyone can be there at once, because then you don't get those facility benefits.
Yep. Well, again, David, Jiri, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedules to spend some time with us and share your insights. I know I've found this interesting and really appreciate it. Like I said, we'll have a chance for, about a 30-minute conversation afterwards. Feel free to stick around if your schedule allows it. If not, that's fine too. But for any of you who attended and would like to talk about some of these ideas in terms of how we could potentially move forward a pilot in the coming months, feel free to stay on. And we'll be hanging out here for a few minutes and waiting to see who decides to stick around for the breakout.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet all of you virtually. Thank you for hosting, Skip.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, so it looks like we've got a couple of different suggestions of things that might be interesting to at least continue a conversation on. One would be data privacy and work from home, and then also this notion of distributed office space. And we don't necessarily have to have a super concrete project emerge from this, but wanted to see if there were folks who were interested, who attended in either one of those two topics. And so what I'd like to do is ask, if you're interested in either the distributed office space concept or work from home and data privacy, let me know if in the chat you've got a preference for one or the other, and we can use that as a way to kind of focus a discussion for those of you who have some extra time. All right, looks like we've got data privacy and work from home. Excellent. So let me just make sure that, Ruthie, are we able to make it so that folks who are remaining on have a chance to speak as well? So far we've got Danny. Yep, go ahead.
I think that folks should be able to unmute themselves, but if not, they can put something in the chat and I can unmute them. Cool,
that sounds great. So it looks like data privacy in the work from home scenario rose to the top, and this is something that's come up a fair amount in some of our previous conversations just earlier today and also last week. And Danny, we're fortunate to have on the call. He's a professor formerly at Oregon State University, now in Colorado, who runs a center focused around Internet of Things and data. And I think, Danny, if you wanted to take a couple minutes just to kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing there, that would be interesting. And see if maybe there are some specific use cases that you're seeing in the data privacy space.
All right, so I'm unmuting myself. There was a phenomenal session, Skip, and everyone else who participated. Thank you so much. As Skip said, I'm really thrilled about these topics because, as Jiri was talking earlier, we are going to rely more on AI, and it's going to also come a lot more at home, not only through Siri and Amazon, Alexa, and all this, but it's probably as we are moving into a new normal. So it's not going to be the old normal. It's going to be a new normal, and no one knows what's the new normal. Everyone talks about this is the now normal, because whatever is now, that's the normal for the next 2-3 weeks, and then it changes again. That's a huge topic, and how this is the interesting thing about the AI. It needs access to a lot of data to give us personal recommendations, to help us. I think Jiri mentioned several activities related to how AI can help with monitoring and making us aware. That's a huge concern. Like, how do we learn on people's private data at home without exposing their privacy, without exposing, especially when you have at home, you have other children, other members of the family who come into the share space. So what we are launching, this consortium, is an industry university consortium that looks at exactly at the intersection of this thrust of AI, but is the kind of AI that works on the edge. In this case, well, works at home. It's the intersection with how do you compute on edge at home because of privacy concerns. What's the interplay with privacy? When people will be able to have these AI solutions deployed at home, how can average people who don't have a PhD in machine learning and AI, how can they control those settings? It will always be a trade-off between what's the level of customization and personalization and service that you get, and what are you willing, how much information you are willing to expose to the system. How can we have people who are end users understand those trade-offs, and how can they navigate those trade-offs and make those informed decisions for themselves? So those are all huge concerns. It's a very hard problem. That's why we are starting this consortium with several industry members, with several universities, with the U.S. National Science Foundation. So this is an exciting time for us to be studying this. What we were planning to do is going to be, I would say, these trends were coming, but now with the COVID, these trends have been made even faster. So they were coming slowly over the years, but now all of a sudden we are thrust into we have to find good solutions to this problem. So I know I spoke a little bit too much. I'll be happy to hear more what other folks are doing in this space. And
yeah, that'd be great. I think that's a good opening. So anyone else on this call want to share a little bit about either what they're working on in this space or some of their thoughts or concerns?
I certainly agree. This is Jiri Skopek. I certainly agree that this is a huge topic, and we certainly don't want to be a situation like in China, where the government kind of sees every move we made. I haven't been really deep into that, but I understand that many of the European states have been really kind of diving into this topic, and there are European legislations which are addressing this issue. I think that that'll be very interesting to see, what kind of a consensus some of the European countries will reach on that. And I think the public discussion is actually much more advanced in Europe on this topic. So I hope we'll be able to learn from the discussion.
So Jiri, are you referring specifically to GDPR or kind of something beyond that?
Well, I know that there was a number of legislations which are being now kind of run through the European community. Like I say, I'm not really totally on the top of this subject. It is something I'm following because, as Danny was saying, it's extremely important. We actually had a situation here in Toronto where we had the sidewalk project, and in fact, there was a huge opposition to the project based on the privacy of the data. In fact, one of the things that the public were very unhappy about was they kind of sort of felt that Google's going to use them more as a kind of a guinea pigs to, use their information to advance their corporate goals and objectives, and they didn't feel safe with that information. So there has been already quite a reaction to that, and I'm not quite sure exactly what the decision was for the sidewalk to withdraw from the Toronto project, but certainly this was a big contribution to that decision. The decision was the opposition of the people to their use of the data, to the use of their data.
Hi, my name's Ann Verome. I'm located in the Washington, D.C. area. What you're just describing about the Toronto project is interesting because it's one thing. Google and the big companies, Facebook, etc., they generally now are all making very righteous statements about protecting the privacy of their users' data. But what they're not realizing is people are beginning to think through the process, and they're saying, we don't want you collecting our data in the first place. And of course, when you're using one of their applications, Google search or Facebook or whatever, you're kind of doing that quid pro quo where you pay for being able to use those services for free. But in the public city spaces, I think people are beginning to say, I don't want to be surveillanced. I don't want, my facial recognition. I don't want my location data. And I don't want my family and my children's patterns collected by these private companies to which the cities are going to outsource because the cities don't have their own in-house capabilities for the kind of surveillancing that they're contemplating. And it is surveillancing. I mean, you can call it other things like, oh, this is just health concerns or traffic concerns or public security concerns, but it's surveillancing. And so, yeah, I think that Toronto thing going down was a big deal because that has been in the works for years and Google's been bragging about it for years. So personally, I'm kind of glad that the Torontians had enough gumption to push back on it.
one thing that's interesting too is with, there's an example locally in Oregon of a program called Orchitect, which is a partnership with Oregon Health and Science University and a couple of other companies, and this has been around for a decade plus now, but it's essentially focused on aging in place. And so they've essentially built hyper-connected environments that allow people to have their autonomy in a way that maybe they wouldn't have before as they're aging, because if something goes wrong, a sensor will trigger something. Now, in the last 8 to 10 years or so, there's been a really big focus on data privacy with this particular program, and they've kind of voluntarily adopted a bunch of new standards governing what data they'll collect, where it'll be housed. So Danny mentioned edge computing, and that's, I think, an important part of this is that who has access to what and who doesn't. And I think that to the extent systems can be designed in a way where data is secure or kept at the edge, and say a government or a company doesn't get access to the granular data, et cetera, there's a variety of different, in other words, controls that can be placed on a system and how it's designed. And so what's interesting about Orchitect is that that's an example where people are voluntarily opting in because of the benefit that more surveillance provides. But the difference is that there's notice, the terms are provided in terms of what data is collected, toward what end it's being used. There's most likely an audit function that allows for third-party verification of no kind of untoward use of data that violates some terms. So again, I think there could be something interesting here from a policy standpoint, where maybe using the context of people being at home and working from home, and it doesn't get much more private or personal than that, maybe there's an opportunity to talk with like the Orchitect folks and see what kind of standards they've adopted and put into place, and what data controls that they've put into place, and maybe come up with some recommendations. It could be a framework, it could be a set of principles that companies could voluntarily agree to adopt when it comes to their own employees. And maybe we could get a number of those companies here in Oregon to look at something like this going forward, and maybe it becomes a model if it's successful or if it works. To the companies, they'd be incentivized to do it because, again, a lot of employees have legitimate concerns around how intrusive is the company going to be in monitoring my performance and what I'm doing day to day, literally in my house, as opposed to in a controlled work environment in an office. And I think there are some real concerns, as we've seen raised in this discussion today. Wanted to get people's thoughts on if there's something there worth exploring further in terms of some essentially voluntary standards. And you can almost imagine it similar to like a B Corp in the sustainability space, but this would be for certain privacy standards.
This is David Cass. Do you hear me?
Yep.
I would just say that if you think about the long-term care, I agree there are issues about privacy in the home, but I mean, we're being monitored at work when we sat at our desks in front of the same computers. And in some ways, there's always measurement by the IT and by what sites you're looking at, whether you're sitting in the office at Comcast or my house. But I think that the long-term care issues and monitoring of what's happening to our seniors in those homes is going to be at the forefront in light of what the pandemic has exposed. It will hopefully increase the number of people to take care of those seniors, but it will also give the staff warning about things that they can't keep up with when they're overworked. So if we put it to healthcare, to extending life, to betterment, there are benefits of having data provided under conditions that are contracted.
Well said. Other thoughts from folks?
This is Ann Broom again. With regard to the work at home, because I think we're all just learning, what the contours of that experience may be. I could foresee there being a situation where you would not only, when companies are making an employee by employee decision as to who has to come into work versus who stays home, that they might, when that becomes a permanent arrangement, have to get the consent of whomever else is living in the home environment with the employee. because the intrusiveness of that, unless you've got a dedicated office and dedicated equipment, and even then you've got children running in, out, etc. All the time I see that in sort of Zoom group conferences, etc. You know, you've got the audio on, and the audio is picking up a lot more in your home environment than just your direct conversation, work conversation. There are a lot of ramifications when that becomes a permanent part of life, work life, which, you know, I agree it is. I mean, here in the Washington, D.C. area, there's a huge proportion of the federal government workforce that I would guess is not going back to the big federal government offices. And so, yeah, I think there's some really major implications there as the surveillance technologies get better and better and better. You know, this talk about monitoring your temperature while you're, you know, there, or monitoring whether you're sweating, monitoring this, monitoring that. That's one thing to do it in the employer's workspace. You know, the employee kind of, there's a quid pro quo agreement there. It's another thing when they're in your home. So one could get quite, yeah.
No, I agree, but we've done studies where we can equip the home so that you avoid the traffic, you avoid things, and many of the workspaces like WeWork, etc., people were working in those, and there was other people around. So it could be set up beyond COVID that you're now working at home to be productive without your kids being there, they'll be in school, and with the private network that you're going to be provided with.
Other thoughts from folks?
Just to respond real quickly, again, this is Ann Broom. I didn't quite catch all of what the prior speaker said. I agree, but even so, there's a difference between working in your own home and working in WeWork. If nothing else, your children are around. So, you know, it is different, I think, from quite anything we've encountered thus far on this scale throughout the workforce.
Because that is, we are working now under a lockdown situation. But 20 years ago, I sent people home with the computers at the office just so they could work at home, avoid the travel to the utility that I work for, and I was connected with them productively. They didn't have to be sitting across from me because they were doing knowledge work on computers. And so I think there's privacy issues. I'm here in Toronto with Erie, so I'm very familiar with the sidewalk fiasco. But I think there's benefit to data. In many cases, the machine learning that we are getting will improve productivity. They'll expose things that we didn't know before. And yes, we have to give up something to get something.
David, I like what you said. You have to, we always have to give up to gain something else. It's always a trade-off. I'm curious, from your vantage point, and maybe from other people on the call, what are some of those killer applications that people could say, well, I could, if I had this at home, and it would improve my productivity and my well-being and my mental state, and I will feel more connected, more engaged with the coworkers. I would be willing to trade off some of my data, or I'm just curious, what's on people's imagination? What's the wildest things? What's the killer applications that will make us productive and engaged while working from home?
I heard a presentation by Dialogue, which is a big architectural company, similar to what the gentleman from Comcast said. 35% of the people are going to be working. They're not coming back to the office. They're making, but the project that they were working on, which is building a brand new building for our college, was on time, on budget, and continued to be done. Instead of going to the fancy studios, they worked remotely, but they had the equipment, they had who knows, they may even have 3D printers and better audio visual, and not a Zoom that crashes 3 times. So the technologies can be improved to make work at home in an organized way, in a contract condition that people will accept. And I think it'll be technology in many cases. And your kids will be at school or in daycare.
Right on.
Skip, I was just kind of looking at this European regulation, which is called the General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR. And, I don't have the feedback on that, but it seems to be addressed to the companies which are actually collecting the data and protecting the citizens. Obviously, I don't know quite what the effect has been, but it's supposed to be, pretty tough regulation. So I don't know if anybody else heard about it or how effective it is.
Yeah, for sure. We've been paying close attention to it since it was a concept rather than implemented. A lot of our members that have European operations or exposure or doing business over there had to think about how they were going to comply with it. And I do think that there is an effort underway in the United States across many states, Oregon among them. California was first out of the gate with its consumer data privacy law, CCPA was the name of it, and that was passed last year. It's had some issues with some stuff that maybe was an unintended consequence, some gaps that it didn't cover that have been an issue where there's been some ambiguity, and the thought was that it was a little bit rushed. And now there are definitely some companies that are scrambling, especially smaller and medium-sized businesses, to try and figure out how to comply and also to get clarity around certain areas that it didn't address or were left ambiguous. And the larger companies seem to have been able to adjust to it just fine. Obviously, they have a lot more resources when it comes to lawyers and lobbyists and the like. But I will say that other states are moving in that direction with either an incremental approach, where they take some portion of what would be a comprehensive consumer data privacy law and they tackle that first and then build incrementally from there. Washington State tried unsuccessfully this past session legislatively to pass its own version of CCPA, addressing some of the issues that CCPA had. One of the big sticking points was like a private right of action. A lot of smaller, medium-sized businesses, as well as large ones, thought that it should be enforced instead by, say, an attorney general at the state level, not left open to individual lawsuits and enforcement that way. But there's definitely been some conversations here in Oregon ongoing for the last year plus, and the Attorney General here is looking at some approach to consumer data privacy legislation, whether it's an incremental one or something more comprehensive, but a couple of years down the road, kind of remains to be seen. I know that in conversations we've had with the state here, there has been some openness to this idea of an incremental approach, maybe in concert with some voluntary standards that industry could adopt. And that allows for some flexibility and, frankly, some experimentation to see whether, those types of behaviors are effective in addressing some of the legitimate data privacy concerns before it gets codified in legislation. And that's one issue here, is that it's changing so quickly. The technology is, as well as some of the uses to which the data is being put. And it's a very complex industry with data brokers, people who are collecting data, people who don't touch the data, but it passes through them kind of in an arm's length way. Through their tech infrastructure. So all those questions kind of need to be addressed. And it's hard to kind of address them all at once, is what people are finding. So yeah, I do think GDPR is kind of where the world is eventually going to head, at least many countries. China's taken an opposite approach, which is kind of a surveillance state. And in the case of Europe, they're arguably, to your point, taking the greatest strides in kind of protecting consumer data, and oftentimes in a way that's seen as a little bit more kind of out there or aggressive than, say, in the United States. And right now, obviously, in the US, we don't have a federal all-encompassing standard. There's obviously specific for financial, specific for healthcare, et cetera. but it's more of a patchwork. So anyway, that was a lot, but that's kind of the landscape right now as I understand it. And it would be interesting to think about in the remaining minutes if folks have any sort of concerns around an approach where maybe we do have some conversations here with some companies and see if there would be interest on their part in adopting some standards or principles as it relates to how they're treating their employees and their employees' data and what they're not going to touch as part of those standards. Thoughts from anyone? All right, looks like we've exhausted the topic. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining this breakout session. I know I enjoyed it. We had some good, vibrant debate. And I think what I'll do is see if we can move forward on an exploration of some policy recommendations as we head into the end of the week, and we'll report that out from this breakout session. So thank you all for your time and appreciate the input, and hope to see you at some of the sessions later on this week. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Skip, and everyone. Jiri and David and